Welcome, reanimated fans. We're going to be talking about episode 6 of season 2 of Interview with a Vampire. Before we get to that, we have one little news tidbit. We haven't seen a lot about the release date, but this is the Marvel Zombies, and this is in the book series. But there's a whole storyline whereupon Groot apparently is the cause of some zombie apocalypse by sneezing. That's really all I have on that front. Did you see anything else within that, Stuart?
Well, who's Stuart?
Oh yeah, you, my co-host. Hi.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Hi, how's it going? So glad to be on the show.
Woohoo.
I haven't read that article, but I'm excited for the eventual release date of Marvel Zombies. Good grief.
I
Let's get
think
there.
that they're struggling maybe a little bit with, the children thing. I don't know. But anyway, we shall be following that and see what happens, and eventually when it gets released, we will review it. But in the
The episode that we're talking about, can I just throw this out there? Like the light by which God made the world before he made light. I think they've gone a little off the rails with their episode titles this
this
season.
episode title, I think we'll have to see about the next one, but I mean, honestly, that's a little ridiculous. But anyway.
In season one, their episode titles, the longest one was 6 words. So I do think that they were just like, you know what's great? Really long episode titles. Let's just lean into that.
Yeah.
Because
Um,
now they're paragraphs.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and we talked before about, some of the episodes earlier in the season that were a little bit slow. I would say episode 5 and 6 totally, I will retract my statement, or at least for these episodes I will, because a lot happens. And this one, also this episode 6 is filling in a lot of interesting things. And we have gone back from modern day and sort of the whole interview between Louis and Daniel Malloy into some back to the big part and the big sort of missing um, puzzle piece in this whole story, which is what has happened to Claudia. But before we get to that, we have Daniel Malloy interacting again with the Talamasca.
Well,
Um,
at first it's just him and Rashid having dinner at
right.
that sushi restaurant that's in the building where Louis and Armand live. And that's kind of weird. It's like
I will also
uh
say this just makes me want to have sushi really badly, like good sushi. It's pretty exciting.
I don't know what they were eating. I did not recognize that dish.
Me
Did you see?
neither, but I
There's
just want.
also a pretty funny. I don't know if they considered it a blooper, but Rashid dropped something from his chopsticks while he was,
Yes, I saw that.
and then they just kind of like played through it, which I'm glad that they did, but also that's tough to try and do a scene with chopsticks, and they were eating I don't know like lima beans.
I did something that's very hard to eat with chopsticks. But anyway, Raglan James makes an appearance and is taunting Daniel Malloy again. Um,
And Malloy's like, "Don't, no, you can't be here. They've sent me with a chaperone." And it turns Mr. Raglan James is
yep.
like, don't worry about Rashid. He loves the hand soap in this restaurant, which I didn't take to mean he's a Talamasca agent, but apparently he's a Talamasca agent, and that guy has to have huge balls.
Well, that and some kind of blocks in his brain so
Yeah.
that
I don't
Armand,
understand how they're getting around this. This is like the cell phone problem for modern movies. It's except in this show, it's the fact that Armand can read everybody's mind.
right. And
That's
then there's an equal thing because Raglan James is his ability to jump into other people.
he
So,
references it. Yeah.
and
Or
I'm
he's
like, so
yeah.
then why hasn't he? I don't know. This sounds weird because he said he makes some comment that if he were able to do that or to do that to Daniel, maybe somebody's holding him back from doing it, that he would be in charge of everything.
I just
He
like the
also,
look that Malloy gives him after he says that. He's like, if I could switch bodies with you, I could be the top of the Talamasca. I think is what he says.
yeah.
And then he just kind of looks at Malloy, and Malloy looks at him kind of like, what? But I guess maybe that's an inside joke, or maybe he'll do it later and we'll all get to say, aha, that's what it was for. But you know this because you said this on a previous podcast episode. This is his special
Hmm.
gift, his Talamasca trait is that he
Yes.
is a body swapper.
Yep. Um, but anyway, I didn't fully get the Rashid thing, but then you kind of get it. There's like a nod to him when he comes back.
Well,
Um,
Malloy calls him Agent Rashid.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's that. But anyway,
And he's
they
just like casually interacting with Raglan James, being like, "Yeah, I guess if Malloy didn't want to get killed by vampires, he should have just stayed in the United States instead of coming here."
right. And Raglan also makes a comment that Malloy seems to be afraid of Armand, but he should really be afraid of Louis. So that's interesting. And so anyway, they
I
kind
mean,
of leave
yeah,
it.
because frankly, even though Armand is way more powerful than Louis, the difference I think is negligible to a human. Either of them could rip him in half if
Right,
they were, and Louis does maybe seem to be the more uh, I don't know, fragile mentally,
right,
emotionally. He can turn on a person, and he's done it before to Malloy. So
right. And so he heads back, and again, what kind of blocking is he doing? Maybe Armand does know it all, who knows? But they end up back at the tower or whatever it is, and
do you ever think that your thoughts are too loud?
me.
IRL. Yeah, like you're sitting in a room, you're in a conference room or something, or you're at a meeting. You're like, oh God, I hope nobody in this room is telepathic because I'm just thinking like negative thoughts or something.
Well, I don't necessarily think that, but I do think that my face is not a poker face. So maybe in the sense that my thoughts are too loud because I show everything on my face. So yeah, sure.
I mean, I think that in a world well, as far as I know, without telepathic vampires, I can only imagine how Malloy is attempting to keep his thoughts to himself as well as his poker face, which also he is tending to show a little more vulnerability in his face these days, since his whole revelations about Armand and San Francisco and those visions started to happen to him over the last couple of episodes. There's definitely some cracks in the facade.
Right. Well, and there is definitely some hints that Armand does know where he is getting some of his information. Um, just because he's like, "Oh, you found this copy that you didn't know you had in the cloud. Give me a break." Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot of skepticism there, and then Armand just kind of turns the tables because he's just like, "Okay, let's talk about what we're all really talking about." And so he basically confronts Louis about the fact and Daniel Malloy about the fact that their memories have returned, but specifically is looking at Louis. And so that then sort of swoops them into the flashback in Paris, and there's definitely like little digs and accusations and unaired dirty laundry, I would say, between
Yeah.
them.
Armand is he references that he's been trying to atone for the sin that he
Right.
committed, this weakness, this cowardice that he and the biggest mistake he's ever made in his life, and that he never can.
Right.
And it's it's a very interesting way to approach this, because it's such a fascinating dynamic between Armand and Louis, and I feel like it's never been as weird as it is in this episode too, because they've like switched power positions, even though it doesn't make any sense
Yep.
to me, because Armand is the powerful one in the relationship, but he's like being submissive for Louis's sake at this time in their relationship. And it's kind of weird the way it gets, maybe weird is the wrong word, but it's interesting the way it's played out in this episode.
Yeah, and there's also, I don't know whether it happens here later, but basically he's like, yeah, I erased your memories, but you asked me to do that.
Hmm.
And so that's also an interesting thing too. The fact that Louis could compel him to do it is another different, like they definitely swap back and forth in terms of who is dominant. And so I guess you have to really question who is actually dominant and what is the play by play here. And there is some insinuation, and I think this is probably right, that Lestat is still playing a role here for both of them. Um,
Yeah,
and
well, certainly well, we'll find out more about that in the next couple episodes, I think.
Right. But anyway, this flashes back then into their time in Paris
Yeah.
and where the coven is doing what they're doing. There's like, um, a move to try to, which is Louis' idea, to placate Santiago, flatter him, give him this option to be like a star. Um, but they're both feeling, but specifically Armand is like, yes, but I was very stupid and didn't realize that there was all this other subterfuge happening in the background that I wasn't the puppet master. It was actually Santiago.
How could
Um,
he not? I guess that here they're showing that he's not omnipotent. He can't see everybody's thoughts all the time. Because
right.
if he could, he would have known. Because they're all the vampires in the coven are basically against him.
Right.
Um,
And they're speaking, how are they doing this without him being aware? Are they able to block him?
yeah.
Or is Armand just like too focused on Louis, and his happiness with Louis? And so there's a lot here that I maybe will be explained later that there is a way to block him, and maybe that will make me understand a little bit more. Um, but they're basically um sort of circulating Claudia's journals to everybody, um, to kind of build up a case against her, is what I'm assuming. There's the lawyer that had been handling all their sort of finances from Lestat, and they kind of go and are quizzing him about the last time he saw Lestat. So there's all this stuff going on in the background. And I do think that the editing here is really great because you see sort of the play being practiced and Santiago acting as if he's playing right into it, and then these little asides where
Hmm.
he's basically like speaking to the other members of the coven and being like, yeah, there's all these like sort of undertones and underpinnings that Armand and Louis are not aware of. And then in the meantime, we have Claudia.
And we have the Louis Armand art conversation
Mhm.
where he brings that art into his office. This is kind of I don't know where this falls in the timeline anymore. Maybe or before the play stuff. But he's like, this is a great piece of art, and this artist might die, and then it'll be worth a lot more, and I'm going to make all this money. And
Mhm.
Armand says he's the first capitalist vampire. And I thought that this, and then there's the thing like, get into the coffin face down, and I'm gonna, do things to you. And this is Louis
Yeah.
telling this to Armand, who is like, yeah, okay, I guess, like, let's go for it. So it's like the first of a couple of scenes where Louis is acting like the pimp again,
Yep.
which we haven't seen since before he was a vampire, basically.
hmm
I thought
And
these were fascinating.
and again, there's always these flip-flopping in terms of who is dominant and who is not. And not just between Louis and Armand, but between Armand and Santiago and the rest of the coven.
Hmm.
And even you see this um, playing out a little bit between the Louis, Armand, and Claudia triangle. And so we also have the side story with Claudia and Madeline, and so there's this whole sort of, and this is the catalyst for a lot of what's going to happen, even though it was already in play. Madeline gets attacked by neighbors pretty brutally, like they break into her shop. They're trashing the place. They're assaulting her. She is going to be sexually assaulted, and Claudia rescues her in a very brutal fashion in a way that is absolutely against everything that we've heard in terms of the rules of the vampires, and this particular coven. She takes out how many people? Like four or five?
Three, it was three who broke into the store, but she might have also killed the guy across the street
I
who was
think
just
she killed
watching.
the guy who was observing, so there was no witnesses.
Yeah.
Um, and interestingly, Madeline's not upset. She's definitely shocked and keeps saying like you're a, and Claudia's like, yeah, I'm a vampire. Like, get with it, lady. But this also brings the storyline forward quite a bit in the sense that there's no escaping what Madeline has seen, and Claudia knows that this is taboo, but wants to make her own companion because Louis and Armand are so bonded, and she feels like she wants something for herself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I feel
he,
like their sentence is already done. Like they're already on the death list of the coven. So I don't know that this is even the thing that does it. Is that what you're suggesting?
Um, I think this is just one of the things, one
One
of the
more nail in the coffin, as
one
it were.
more, yeah, one more piece of evidence that they are not fitting in with what the coven is supposed to be, and specifically Claudia is not. Um, although Louis' involvement in all of this is, I think, a piece of this, because Santiago doesn't just have it in for Claudia, he definitely has it in for Louis as well.
Mhm.
So, there's like the whole guilt trip that Claudia plays with Louis, where she basically says, like, you have this person, I want my own person, and also makes the whole thing where fully says that she's not big enough to make Madeline into vampire, so she needs Louis' help. Um, and they haven't done this before, so I think that's why Louis goes to Armand. And also, if Armand is the one who decides it, it wouldn't be illegal because he's the maître. So that's the part where this all starts to go off the rails. And I mean, I knew the book, so I knew Armand betrayed them both, but did you get that sense? Um, I
No,
think you can
well,
read into it
I knew it
knowing
was
it.
coming, and he's already said this was my greatest sin, and yada yada. So we know it's coming even from the beginning of the episode. The thing that the surprise to me was they ask Armand to do it, and he's like, and Louis is in there going, he's gonna do it, he's gonna do it. And then back in the interview in the future in Dubai, he's like, I couldn't do it. I've never made a vampire. The idea is abhorrent to me. I didn't remember if that was canon or not. I thought that that was quite surprising. Part of me thought he would do it. Does Louis make Madeline in the book?
Yes, he
He,
does
he
make her,
does.
even though, although in the book, Madeline is definitely like, and this is one of the tweaks they've made, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad one, to sort of tweak the story a bit because you have to, but in the books, Madeline had lost her daughter, and
Yeah.
so she's viewing Claudia as a replacement. They kind of say that maybe there's a something with a dead sister in this,
I
but
don't I think they really lean away from that then because
uh,
they're like, who was this? Is she a replacement? And she's like, she was the dumb sister. I think I like this story of Madeline and the way that she talks to Armand about her life in Paris, how he's like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna kill yourself eventually, you know that, right? And what are you gonna do when Claudia kills herself and walks into the sun or throws herself into a fire? Because it's gonna happen. And Madeline's ready. She's like, look, I've just survived World War II in occupied, Nazi occupied Paris by finding the love that I needed to find, even if it was shameful, and watching my neighbors like either starve to death or I forget the other example she gave. There was another person who like didn't make it. Um, and I thought that that was really like this is all completely non-canon, and I kind of I like that element of it. I thought that she is a pretty well developed character, way more developed than the nanny or the woman who's lost her daughter and just wants a daughter. Like
oh
that's
yeah,
very
and
one note.
it's very one note, and also in the book, she's clearly like mentally like unbalanced. And so like in the book, Louis is very much not, he should not be making this woman a vampire. And he knows that, and he just does it because in some ways he feels guilty, and Claudia does. It's interesting how they've turned this story, and I think they did it in a very good way. But Claudia basically guilts him in the book because she's like, I can't go out in public. I need somebody else instead of you. You're with Armand, so you owe this to me. In this case, she kind of does the same thing, but in a in a more adult way, honestly, and
Well, yeah, because
also
they talk about maybe having a sexual relationship, but not
right,
yet.
right. But
Yeah.
not yet. And so anyway, but Louis, you can understand why, even though he maybe is guilted a little bit, he honestly does want to do this for Claudia, but not as much, like so that she can have this thing. And then when Armand demurs and is like, no, I can't do it, Louis is like, all right, well then I guess I'll do it. And it is, I feel like them making Madeline to the vampire was a pretty cool scene. And just how she was like all of her memories and how Louis experienced this, but not just
Yeah.
experienced her memories, but how Claudia was viewed by Madeline. And this felt like the right thing to do. So I loved how the visuals of this were playing out, but the narration and the evolution of the relationship between Claudia and Louis, and I do think it showed love between them versus guilt and manipulation.
Hmm.
And then You know,
Did you
we
watch the after show where they talked about this scene?
I didn't.
It's
I
funny because they had a what are they called? An intimacy counselor or intimacy advisor on set for this scene. Even though it's not like a lovemaking scene, I guess they do have two people, biting her neck. And
mm,
they talked about the distance from the neck and what to do with their mouths. And I just thought, and gosh, the dude who plays Grey Worm, Jacob Anderson is no,
yep.
not yeah, Jacob Anderson is like talking about how much he like kind of appreciated that part of the shooting of that scene. I thought that was very interesting. Intimacy people advisors, I forget what they're called, but they're all over sets these days, which is a good thing. And I think that probably did help that scene um, to be as successful as it was.
Yeah. Um, I also just backtracking a little bit. I do think that the scene between Madeline and Armand was pretty good. He's
Yeah,
basically quizzing her about how, does she understand what she's really getting into? He says something to her, will you eat your food like your people like you're eating that apple? And in some ways he's trying to dissuade her, and she's not being dissuaded. And I mean, the reveal that he hasn't made somebody and how much of a travesty he believes that is interesting. But Madeline's very much like nonplussed by it. She's really focused on this life now.
yeah,
And so anyway, I just thought that all these actors did a phenomenal job. I think they all have great chemistry together, and they did a really good job at this story. And this makes the betrayal of Armand more poignant because you do have this glimpse that Madeline and Claudia could potentially have a happy ending. Armand even says to Madeline, what will you do when she like throws herself into the fire because she's going to do that? And Madeline's answer is, well, maybe she won't because I'm here. And so
yeah.
I thought they did a really nice job at rounding out that story and making it a little less as you said, like shallow and sort of one dimensional as it was in the book. There's definitely hope there. And even how beautifully they shoot the scene in the cafe with all of them, I thought was nice.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much time has passed by this scene. I wish they'd kind of painted that a little closer. That's also what's been happening since the turning of Madeline. Um, Armand comes to Louis's house with a suitcase.
Mhm,
He's moving in, is basically what's happening. And Madeline and Claudia have left Paris, and Louis is like, I can feel Madeline. I can feel where she is because she's my fledgling. And
mhm.
Armand's like, Yep, that's how it is. That's what's happening. Um, and then he's like, I've left the coven. I made a choice. They made me choose, and I chose. Uh, he doesn't say exactly what he chose at this point, which I think is part of the lingering problem between Louis and Armand. If not, certainly it's more than that, but that's part of it. He's being deceitful in this moment. And but now they're like they've moved in, and when they meet again at this cafe, Claudia is like, "What do you think of my coffin?" Because apparently Armand is like sleeping in her coffin,
Yep.
which is like I guess I'm kind of curious how Armand thought this was gonna go. Um, he doesn't need to stay there with Louis. He could be trying to persuade Louis to leave Paris, I would assume,
Yeah.
and just be like, look, they can find Claudia and Madeline. They'll go find them and kill them, and then I could get away with this scot free. So I'm wondering a little bit like why did they stick around?
Well, I also there was a whole thing where Louis keeps talking about Claudia and Madeline leaving Paris. Like, why didn't they stay away? So there's that as well. So I don't, because he even says like after he turns her that they're off and they're doing their thing and they're away and so they'll be safe or something. So there's some acknowledgement that
They left
um
and came back for
yeah,
this
and
for
so
this
why?
reunion.
So why? And I don't know, maybe Armand is under Santiago's power, or there's something else happening, which I guess we know there might be something else happening at the end of this episode, but they, you know, this moment that they catch that you fully sense the betrayal is even more poignant because you hear Madeline say to Louis, "Oh, why don't you just tell him how much, why don't you show him how much you love him?"
Hmm.
And hear Armand, you can see Armand hearing that,
Yeah.
and then the whole time slows down trick happens. And
Which Armand is doing. He's the only one we know of who can do this. And like,
right,
and Jacob Anderson again in the after show was calling out the background actors for their ability, take after take, to
to be
just stop
still.
moving and be completely still. And you know, it's good on the production side that they when they get their bags thrown over their heads by the other vampires, they don't knock into any of them because you know that would obviously ruin the magic. Maybe they
Yep,
had to do some takes where because there's like four people moving toward the table all of a sudden, or at least
I
three.
know.
So that's it's a good scene. It's kind of like the inevitable betrayal deal, and then the next thing we know, they're getting bags ripped off their heads on stage at the Theater of the Vampires, and this is the one-time special show. It's a matinee, so it's during the day, and we know that that's not a good thing for some of this cast's fate.
Hmm.
Um, and there's Santiago strutting and peacocking on stage, while is it Sam or somebody goes downstairs to the green room and says, Mr. Lioncourt or Lioncourt,
Yep.
it's 10 minutes to stage time.
Yep.
And he's looking very thoughtful, don't you think? Lestat. He's not looking gleeful, he's not happy.
Nope. He's Look, I think we're gonna find out a lot more in the next episodes, and I think there's sadness there, but also he has to play a part, and he looks like he knows that, but it doesn't look like it gives him any joy.
Since when does he give a shit about rules, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So I'm very curious to see what happens next. But look, I think he's also a vampire that knows when the odds are against him or when he's outnumbered. And I mean, honestly, that's a little bit of the mistake that Armand made was not understanding where the coven stood or how they were being influenced by Santiago.
Yeah.
So,
And
I
it
mean,
kind of makes you wonder a little bit like this power swap he did with Louis, um did that cause him to like lose the front foot with the coven in general?
well, I
Like,
mean, I think definitely his relationship with Louis did, so maybe.
yeah.
Just overall. I think another thing to think about that I was, as we were watching these episodes, is the fact that Armand has remembered all of this. So it's not like his memory's been blotted out. So he remembers his betrayal, vividly. He remembers that he did this, and he's had to live with Louis and live with this.
Does Louis not I feel like Louis does remember this. It
Well,
was
now he does,
the
but
San Francisco stuff that he'd been he'd forgotten. Maybe we'll find out that he's also forgotten parts of Paris.
he
But
said when he did his whole, like when he tried to commit suicide, that there were parts of him that were blotted out. And every time Claudia comes out, maybe it's not Armand blocking it, but maybe he is doing it himself. But I
hmm,
feel like Armand is the only one that really does have this and has been living with this and carrying this. Maybe Louise just been blocking this so that he doesn't have to think about it. But
possible.
that's why they pull out all the pages of Claudia's diary, right? Like there's a lot going on here. So anyway, I do like the triumphant return of the Vampire Lestat, and so I'm excited to watch the rest of the season.
Yeah, two more episodes to go, and join us for the next one when we get back together. You can let us know what you think of this one. This was, let me try and remember the headline. Like the light by which God made the world before he made light. And that's a line that they put in Sam's play, which is just a rip off of Waiting for Godot.
Yes, it
It's
is.
kind of funny that conversation where I mean he's acting within acting within acting as Ben Daniels as Santiago ripping Sam as the playwright a new one where he's like nothing's happening in this boring play, but it's actually like it's a vampire version of Waiting for Godot, except it's Enduring for Guido is the name of the play,
Mm,
which I thought was all very funny
it was very funny.
and
Um,
very telling that Sam mentally calls Santiago Maitre in that scene.
yes, that is definitely true.
Sorry, we were trying to wrap up, but there's this episode has a lot in it, guys. There's a
It
lot
does.
going on.
And as an aside, I don't know if you saw that there is going to be a production of
Enduring for Guido?
uh, Waiting for Godot with Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter on Broadway.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that should be interesting. Anyway, that's all I will say about that. Anyway,
Say
until
your
the next
goodbyes,
time.
AJ Conrad.
Yeah, until next time. Ciao, and can't wait to see the rest.
Catch you later. Look us up on reanimated.podbean.com for all of your communication and old podcast news needs.
Until next time. Ciao.